We are back here on the channel for the top upset picks in the March Madness first round games. Everyone wants to know the higher seeds that could potentially go on a run here in March Madness. We've had a lot of Cinderella runs throughout the years, notably NC State last year going from the 11 seed to the Final Four with DJ Burns. Who could forget that? A few years back, we had St. Peter's at the 15 seed going to the Elite Eight there. And I could just go throughout the years and name numerous other examples. And in the first round, there's always a lot of chaos here with these higher seeds winning. So I'm going to be going through some examples, giving my thoughts on the likelihood of each happening, going from the most likely upset to the least likely with some of those really high seeds there, some 3 seeds that could potentially be on upset alert. And I must note that I'm not having any 8 versus 9 seeds or 10 versus 7 games included in the video because I do not consider those upsets. Historically, the 8-9 game has been a bit of a coin flip and the 10-7 game slightly favoring the 7 seed, but really over 40% of the time, the 10 seed does win out in that matchup. So here we started out with the one game where the 12 seed is favored in this matchup. Colorado State favored by 2.5 over Memphis. This game is being played in Seattle, and tough news for Memphis with Tyrese Hunter being out for this game and likely the tournament. You can see here that statistically he's not their best player. PJ Haggerty putting up 22 a game. He's just been great as of late. Dane Danger also good at the big man spot, but he struggled a bit in that American Conference tournament there, although they did win it. I was quite surprised that Memphis even got this number 5 seed, to be honest. I feel like BYU should have gotten this spot. If you were watching the bracketology videos, Memphis was around a 7 or 8 seed in the past couple of weeks here. Yes, they did win their conference tournament, but that was just a bit of a surprise there. And in this matchup, I think that Nico Medved, coach of Colorado State, is much better than Penny Hardaway of Memphis. You guys can debate that in the comments there. And I think that Nick Clifford is one of the best players in the country here. He will have a great matchup with PJ Haggerty. Nick Clifford, you're seeing his stats on the screen. He's just an absolute beast, and he took over in the Mountain West tournament. Colorado State, if they didn't win their conference tournament, they would not be in the dance here. And they won 10 straight to end the regular season, and none of those were really close. You're seeing the scores of those recent games against Utah State in the semifinals. That game ended as an 11-point margin, but they were up by around 30 earlier in that game, and they were up 20 plus for most of the game against Boise State here. You can see that they essentially knocked out that Boise State team from the tournament, beating them 2 times in the last week. And I just think that this team is absolutely rolling right now with Nick Clifford, and I think that their coaching of Nico Medved will lead to a victory in this matchup here. I do not think you should be scared off by everyone taking Colorado State to get the upset. Yes, notably, New Mexico was in this exact same situation, playing Clemson last year after winning the Mountain West in the 11-6 matchup. They were favored by, I think, 1 point in that matchup and ended up getting skull-drugged by around 20 points. And yes, that could happen here. My numbers, for what it's worth, say this game should be a pick'em, so there's some slight value on a point spread perspective in taking Memphis here. But I definitely do think that Colorado State is a great upset selection. I will be coming out with my best point spread picks later on this week, and be sure to check out my other videos on the channel, such as my full bracket breakdown and predictions there that I posted yesterday. Next, we get to UC San Diego and Michigan, and this game opened up. Michigan was a 4.5 point favorite. Now it's down to 2.5, and I think that it could go a little bit lower here. This game being played in elevation in Denver, Colorado, and Michigan had to play 3 games in 3 days here, and they won all of them in the Big Ten tournament Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but now on a short week in altitude against this UC San Diego team who's been great in the mid-major ranks. They notably went to Utah State and won in the non-conference here, so we know that they can play with these great teams, and I just think that Michigan has been a little fraudulent this year. All of their wins really in the last couple months of conference play have been just by a handful of points, other than that quarterfinal game against Purdue. But even you saw in the semifinals and final of the Big Ten tournament against Maryland and Wisco, they came down to the wire there. I do think that their 2 big men, Golden and Wolf, could present a bit of challenge for this UC San Diego team, but I just think that this Tritons team has been playing so well coached, great on the defensive end, can put some pressure on this Michigan team here, so I definitely like them for the upset, and I love the altitude advantage there. Michigan coming off the 3 games in 3 days here, I think that could be a bit of a challenge, and also Wolverines a bit disrespected here as they did not get rewarded for winning that Big Ten tournament. It's clear that the committee just does not value the conference tournaments at all there. Then we get to the next one. In this game, we'll play the winner of the game that I just mentioned. It is likewise in the Denver Nuggets arena, and I do not think that this is a good matchup for Texas A&M here. You can see that they are favored by 7.5. My numbers have this one at around a 5.5 point spread, so I think that it could potentially come down even more. And yes, Yale did have to play on Saturday and Sunday, this game being played across the country on a Thursday, whereas Texas A&M, they were bounced out of the SEC tournament last Thursday. So a little bit more rest for them. But I just think that this 3-point shooting could be the advantage of this Yale Bulldog team if Poulikitis is knocking down shots, as we saw last year against Auburn in this 13 versus 4 matchup where Yale got that victory. You've also got Bez Mbang, who has just been an absolute machine in Ivy League play. And this Texas A&M team really can struggle from the outside, and that led to their demise in some of the games that you're seeing in their last 5, notably that Vanderbilt game where they were the superior team by far and just lost that one at home. And then they got blown up by Florida. Did get that huge win against Auburn because they are able to dominate the offensive glass. So that could be a bit of a challenge for Yale, but obviously they are the lower seed here. I do think that they are very well coached under Jones, but I do think that Buzz Williams is a great coach for Texas A&M. This is going to be a very interesting stylistic matchup. Maybe Wade Taylor can take over for Texas A&M, but don't be surprised if it is a close one in the final few minutes. Then we get to VCU versus BYU. This one is a very compelling matchup just because I think that this region is wide open for the taking. I think that either of those teams could go on a run here to the Sweet 16 or potentially Elite 8, as I think that they could upset Wisconsin or Alabama or whoever is in their path. But they first have to meet each other. This game, again, is in this Denver Nuggets arena. I just think that this altitude is an interesting layer that you can add onto this game, and it's really good for BYU that they get to play here, as they obviously are great in the elevation. Their supporters will always travel for them, but it's very close to Provo, Utah here in Denver. So I think that they will have a large fan support, whereas VCU going across the country. And they do have a rest advantage here, as their last game was on Friday. VCU coming across the country after they barely won that A-10 tournament, winning 3 games in 3 days over George Mason there. But with all that being said, I do really like this VCU pressure defense here. I think that they could make this one into a dogfight against this BYU team here. And for what it's worth, my numbers say that this one should be a pick'em here between these two teams. Obviously, I mentioned the fan advantage and the elevation dynamic in favor of BYU. And I do think that if they get hot from 3, then this VCU team could be in trouble. But BYU can turn the ball over, and I really do like this VCU defense. So I'm really conflicted on what to pick here. I think that it's just going to be a great stylistic matchup between these two teams. Definitely looking forward to that matchup. Then we get to some of the lesser likely upsets here. You can see Clemson favored by 7.5. I really like this Clemson team. I really do like Mcneese, although I do think that they are worse than last year. I'm going to be taking Clemson in this matchup, but do not be surprised if Mcneese is up double digits with a few minutes left to play, because Mcneese goes absolutely nuclear from 3 here. They just absolutely dominated the Southland Conference this year. But Clemson in that ACC, they played a lot of inferior competition, and they notably went 18-2 in conference play. They then lost a heartbreaker against Louisville in the semifinal of the ACC tournament here. But I just think that this Clemson team is very good, very well coached. They went on an Elite 8 run last year in the tournament. I just think that Chase Hunter is great at the guard spot. Ian Shefflin with some tournament experience as well. But Will Wade, I think he's a great coach for this Mcneese team. They like to run and gun, and I think that if they are hitting their 3s, then Clemson could be in trouble here. But I'm not going to predict this upset necessarily outright for Mcneese there. Then we get to Drake versus Missouri. This one is going to be perhaps the most interesting matchup of styles here. You can see the record on the screen. The Drake Bulldogs 30-3. That is just impeccable. Whereas Missouri 22-11, but they did play a much harder schedule here in the SEC, the best conference in college basketball. And I just think that Drake, they have had a couple weeks off here as they won the Missouri Valley Conference around 10 days before this matchup will take place here. Missouri did get bounced pretty early in the quarterfinal against Florida. I really like their guard play, and I think great turnaround from last year where they didn't even win a game in conference play. But if they get cold from 3, as they kind of did at the end of conference play, you see that they lost 4 of their last 5, then this Drake defense and slow style of offense really could lead to an upset there. You see the point spread, 6.5. I think that's interesting. My numbers have it at a 4-point spread, but I know a lot of people who are really bullish on Missouri. Really just comes down to how you think it will play out between these matchup of styles here. And it is worth mentioning that Drake has made the tournament the last 2 years, and they've had a big lead in the second half of both of those games, and we're not able to get it done. So maybe we see something similar here. Missouri can definitely come back from any type of deficit. So I think that this one's going to be very interesting, but I will give the edge to Missouri there, but do not be surprised if Drake turns it into a rock fight in that one. Then we get into another one here, 12 versus 5, Oregon versus Liberty. This game being played in Seattle, which obviously does not help out this Liberty Flames team. But I do think that it is interesting here, as my numbers say it should be around a 3 or a 4 point spread. I kind of disagree with that, though. Oregon favored by 6.5. I feel like they should be favored by more. I know that a lot of their results in conference play were a bit close, and they benefited in a lot of those close games, similar to the way that Michigan team did. But I just think that Dana Altman has been great in the tournament throughout the past few years. You saw it last year as well. And I just think that Shellstad and Biddle are great players here. I do not think that Liberty can slow them down there. But this Liberty team has obviously been great in their own right in Conference USA action, and they were impeccable in the out of conference, beating some notable opponents as well there. So I do think that that one could be interesting here, but I do think that the fan support will really work in favor of the Oregon Ducks there. Then we get to another one that I'm not personally predicting, but it could happen theoretically here. I think that this High Point team has been great throughout conference play in the Big South, although some of those results in their conference tournament were a little bit closer than expected there. Against this Purdue team, who's been very inconsistent over the last couple of months in conference play here, I thought they were going to go on a run in the Big Ten tournament. No, they lose to Michigan by 18 points in that one. It was really never a close game in the second half after they barely even beat USC. In the game before, they were struggling to even win that. So I do think that this Purdue team could be in a little bit of trouble here. Some people are saying that Braden Smith might be transferring, and Trey Kaufman-Renn, their great big man, he's no Zach Edey of years past. And we know that other than last year when they did make the final of the NCAA tournament, they had a notorious reputation for choking Matt Painter in some of these big spots in the NCAA tournament. So I definitely think that inconsistency and tumultuous style of play could lead to this High Point team potentially getting it done. But at the end of the day, I do think that Braden Smith will hold it down here for this Purdue team to get the upset, but would be interesting if High Point could make it a game there. Then we get to another 4-13 matchup. I think that Grand Canyon actually has a much better chance than High Point to get this upset, but I think that they are playing a much better team in Maryland here. But it's worth noting that this Maryland team is very young, not very experienced. They haven't made the tournament in a while here. I do really like Willard, their head coach, and Derek Queen, one of the best big men, and he is a freshman as well. Julian Reese, Gillespie, Rodney Rice, some of these guys. Their last 5 losses have all come at the buzzer, I think, something like that. You obviously know how their Big Ten semifinal ended against Michigan, horrible with the Trey Donaldson layup at the end of the game going full court. And then the Michigan State loss where Holloman pulls up from three-quarter court to call game in that one. So I do think that this Maryland team is very good, but I do think that they only play 6 players. If Derek Queen, let's say, gets in foul trouble, or maybe he's just a little bit inconsistent, is off of his game, this Grand Canyon team can definitely pull off the upset. We know what happened last year. They just out-physicaled that St. Mary's team in the 5-12 matchup, and they made it into a rock fight against Alabama, nearly won that game there. And I do think that they will have a lot of fan support as this game being played in Seattle. They took over in Spokane last year, and I'm not sure how much fan support Maryland's going to have in this one going across the country to Seattle. So I do think that that could work in their advantage here. I do not expect this one to close at the 10.5 point spread that you're seeing on your screen. I expect it to be within single digits here at 8 or 9 points. I really do like both of these teams here. Would not shock me if Grand Canyon made it a close game there and mucked things up. Then we get to the final 3 here. These are much less likely as there are 4 versus 13s. I must also mention that a lot of people like the 11 versus 6 and 12 versus 5 upsets, but actually the 13 versus 4s that I just went over have happened 8 times in the last 8 tournaments. So historically, as of late, we've seen around 1 per tournament. So just keep that in the back of your mind there for filling out your bracket. But here we get into Kentucky versus Troy. I'm not big on this Troy team coming out of the Sun Belt. I do not even think that they were the best team in the Sun Belt this season, but I just think that this is more so a reflection of this Kentucky team. I mean, you see they have 11 losses here. They also do have some great wins here, but I think that they can really lose to anyone. Yes, Mark Pope may be a slightly better coach, more consistent in some of these games against lesser competition, but I still do think that this Kentucky team that lost to Oakland last year under Coach Calipari could certainly lose to the Troy Trojans here. You can see the spread is only 10.5 here, so if Troy does get hot from 3, make this one a bit of a shootout, then this Kentucky team can get upset there. Not that I'm personally predicting it, but don't be surprised if it happens. Then we get to another one. I actually really like this Wisconsin team, and you can see the spread is around 16 and a half. I think it might actually go up to around 17 or 18 in favor of the Badgers there. But I just think that it's interesting to note that much like Michigan, they were in that Big Ten tournament final. They actually had to play 4 games because they were a 5 seed in the Big Ten tournament. So play 4 games in 4 days. And then on the short week here, they're playing the first game in the morning at 11:30 local against this Montana team who locked up their conference tournament a few days earlier. They will have maybe more fan support in this matchup here, and they're used to playing at elevation. They're much closer to Denver, Colorado. I don't personally love this Montana Grizzlies team. I thought that Northern Colorado actually was much better in the Big Sky Conference, and the Big Sky historically doesn't do very well in the tournament. But I do think that that's interesting, and I must also point out that Wisconsin has lost to some pretty bad teams this year and have had some pretty bad chokes. They notably choked a 15-point lead with a few minutes left at home against Oregon to lose that one in overtime, and then they had a big lead at halftime at home against Penn State in the regular season finale and then lost that matchup somehow by double digits. So I do think that this one could happen. Things would have to get pretty weird, but it could happen, though. It is a 16-point margin on the spread there. And then I do not see this one at all, UNC Wilmington versus Texas Tech. This last one I'm going to mention. But my numbers do say that UNC Wilmington should be a spread bet. They say that the spread should be around 11 or 12 points here for what it's worth. I don't see it. I really think that this Texas Tech team is going to go on a run, but I think that it's worth noting that UNC Wilmington was definitely the best team in the Coastal Athletic Conference, but they actually struggled in a lot of those games, barely beat Charleston, and then barely beat the 12th-seeded Delaware Hens in that final. So that'll be interesting there against this Texas Tech team, who I think is poised to go on a run there with JT Toppin and co. So worth mentioning that as well. And in terms of the 15s and 16 seeds, yes, it could happen, but I'm just not seeing anything in particular this year. Wouldn't be surprised if one of those games came down to the wire, but I think it would probably be much more likely to be a 15 seed than a 16 seed this year. I think that all of these 1 seeds are pretty locked down, and I think that they will dominate in those matchups. Maybe Robert Morris could challenge Alabama if the Crimson Tide aren't hitting their shots, or maybe if St. John's isn't hitting their shots on offense, it could be a bit of a rock fight in their matchup, but I do not see anything particular in those matchups here. I think that the 13 versus the 4s and the 12 versus the 5s are really what you want to target here. Maybe you get super frisky and go with one of these 14s over 3, but I really wouldn't recommend any of those. Maybe, though, Troy over Kentucky. So with all that being said, let me know what you guys think about these upset predictions in the comments down below. What are you guys predicting from either a point spread perspective or an outright perspective in your guys' brackets? Let me know. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys all in the next one.